I'd like to welcome everyone to our first event of 2021. I'm Priya Gopal, co-chair of the Professional Development Committee. Many of you may be familiar with our group and our community. For those of you attending for the first time, just want to tell you a little bit about our mission, because we're passionate about connecting, promoting, and empowering women in their professional advancement in fintech. We're a community of more than 4,000 individuals, and we have members joining our events not only from New York City, but across the country and even international now. And thanks to the pandemic, we've pivoted to virtual events. We feature topics and events that are relevant to our community. And of course, we're always looking for feedback from you. So tell us how we can best support you, whether it's your career goals, your professional growth, networking, or something else. And if you aren't already a member, sign up on our website, nycfintechwomen.com, to stay on top of events and news. So with that, I am super excited about our event today. Digital currency is a topic that is so relevant, sometimes controversial, and always interesting. And we have an amazing panel of experts sharing their insights and experiences. This event would not be possible without the support of our sponsors, Sherman and Sterling. So thank you for your partnership and ongoing support. Without further ado, so let's get to our expert panel, and I'll hand it off to our moderator for this evening, Ray Sharif of Grayscale Investments. Take it away, Ray.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, and thank you for our awesome panelists that we have. Today I'm joined by Melissa Lacey at Bank, Jen Matrenga at Provenance Blockchain, and Donna Parisa at Sherman and Sterling. So thank you guys again for joining us. I think I'd like to kick it off by having everybody introduce themselves, give a little bit about their background and what they do as it relates to digital assets and the blockchain. And then we can go through some questions that I thought would be interesting. And we are going to put aside, I think, 15 minutes or so at the end for questions that you all in the audience have. So I can kick it off and then I'll hand it over to Melissa. I'm Ray Sharif Ascari. I head up investor relations and business development at Grayscale Investments. I have been there for about 2.5 years. I work with institutional investors, high net worth investors, and really, my role is to bridge the gap from digital assets back to traditional investing. Before Grayscale, I worked for an investment bank for 10 years.
Fun. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Lacey, and I'm the co-founder and product director at Bank with a Q, B-A-N-Q. And I've been building products out for the last 13 years, and I'm definitely more of a human interaction designer than I am a fintech designer. And the funny thing is I feel like empathy and human connection is oddly left out, especially when we look at financial technology and neo-banking, which again, like personal finances should be built around empathetic design, and it's not really being hit. So that's something I really look into when building out Bank. And though Bank is still in our startup phase, and we're currently still building out a lot of our crypto wallets and our investments in blockchain. But blockchain is definitely a part of like our DNA. It's like our backbone. It's what we do. It's our mentality. Because our founding team is also the founding team of Prime Trust, which is a very dominant player and infrastructure provider in the crypto space. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll jump in next. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Jen Matrenga. I lead strategic initiatives and business development for Provenance Blockchain, which is the leading financial services blockchain across the globe. I come to the table with kind of 2 decades of global financial services experience. I started my career off at Goldman Sachs in investment banking and private wealth management, spent a decade there, really looking at how the tippy top 1% of the world manage their money. I made the move from money to meaning and moved into the emerging market finance space and jumped into the nonprofit sector and worked for one of the largest international development organizations across the world. As part of that work, I had the opportunity to lead strategic initiatives and new technology efforts for the development organization and had the opportunity to pilot some of the very early blockchain initiatives focused on digital identity with the World Bank and the UN. I fell in love with the technology and realized how quickly the impact that it could have on the world. And and based here in San Francisco. Unfortunately, got connected to the founding team at Figure Technologies, which created Provenance Blockchain, joined month one, and it's been an adventure ever since.
Hi, I'm Donna. I'm a partner at Sherman & Sterling. I am a derivatives lawyer by day, but I also head the firm's fintech initiative called the Fintech Foundry, as well as the Sherman Women's Initiative. And I love when my worlds collide like this panel tonight. Sherman's Fintech Foundry is really designed to bring the community together through our Fintech Salon series, where we participate in events like this one. And so we've sponsored some really great events in the past. Our FinTech Insights, which is our thought leadership platform. So if you go to our website, you'll see a global regulatory sandbox map. You can click on a country, see what regulatory sandboxes are available, and get more information. We've also published a guide with the UK Department of International Trade on how to access the US markets, both for capital raising and for a customer base. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to check it out. And last, we have our FinTech Advisory platform, and that's where we partner with startups and provide mentorship and advice as they scale their business to success. And I'm delighted to be part of the panel today.
Great. So how did, for all of you, and we can kick it off with Melissa again, how did you first get involved in the digital asset space? Some of you have started to a little bit touch on that. What were your thoughts then, and how have they evolved since you've been involved in the space?
Wow. I don't know if it's more or less like other stories, but it kind of comes down to wanting to buy something you can't buy with cash. From the early days where you're like, I just want to buy some shrooms. Maybe I should get Bitcoin. And then you're like, wow, I don't know how this works. This is all very confusing. And now I think I have Bitcoin, but I don't know where it is and how I should get into this. And then diving deeper into the space recently now with Bank and Prime Trust. And what interests me most about it really is more like the libertarian side of it and financial freedom and independence. And you own your own wallet. And who are you to tell me what I can do with my money now that I've officially figured out how to use it? Like the options are endless, especially as it becomes more global. Yeah, so I wouldn't say like my first interaction was that of success, but more curiosity.
Jen?
I think having worked in private wealth and investment banking for, as I said, kind of the tippy top 1% of the world, you realize pretty quickly that wealthy people beget wealth and access to opportunity in a way that, having juxtaposed that with the decade plus that I spent working in countries like Rwanda or the Congo, where people would, if they were able to salvage any amount of money, they would bury it in a hole in their mud roof hut or under their mattress and could have that be stolen at any point in time. And for me, really kind of recognizing that juxtapose between access to opportunity and not, the concept of digital assets, digital currency, to me became a global story. And it was not, it's how do we create a level playing field for every single individual across the globe. And the reality is certain asset classes have been digital for years, others aren't. And most of the people living at the bottom half of the world don't have access to very few things digital, despite the fact they have cell phones, and probably more digitally forward ways of connecting than ever before. And so I really saw this unique opportunity to kind of bridge that gap. And when the Bitcoin white paper came out, when I started working on some of the early digital identity pilots, I just thought about how transformational the technology blockchain could be to basically every global sector. Clearly my experience is in financial services, which is where I'm rooted today. But I believe that the technology can impact virtually every sector across the globe moving forward.
That's really compelling. And I think for me, it really resonates because there are, 2.5 billion people in the world who don't have access to basic financial services. And I think sometimes people forget that because it's really easy for me to send you a Venmo or use my credit card. And it's just such a second nature thing to us.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting stories that hit me front and center was, I was in a really small town, a rural village in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and there was a woman that I was meeting with who was a genocide survivor, and she had been able to salvage a small amount of capital. And for her, she wasn't allowed access into a bank. So she wasn't able to even enter into a bank because she had no identity. She had no shoes. She was pushed away. And there were what are called susu collectors in these towns, where the only place she would be able to save her money in a safe place, she'd have to pay interest to save it versus get interest on it. And it just hit me kind of front and center. The concept of having digital currency accessible via cell phones would just allow these women and these more vulnerable populations access to opportunity that we take for granted every day.
So one of my roles at Sherman & Sterling is that I am the financial services industry relationship coverage head. So that means in that role, I go off and I talk to senior executives at the major financial institutions, think Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, Citigroup, et cetera. And in talking to these senior executives, and we're probably going back, 7 years ago or so, even more, time flies, you lose track of it. It became clear that fintech was going to be a disruptor to the industry. And I think it hasn't been as much as a disruptor as maybe people hoped and or worried, depending on your perspective in those early days, but it certainly transformed the industry and it will continue to transform the industry. So in order to remain relevant to our financial services clients, which is about 40% of the firm's revenue, we had to get immersed in the fintech ecosystem and become an active participant so that we could add value. Personally, my practice is derivatives. So we're always looking at new asset classes, right? I went through the birth and death of credit derivatives, a couple of equity bubbles and subsequent bursts. So I actually spend quite a bit of my time every day working on digital asset trading issues, exchanges, options, futures. For example, we represent Backed, one of the first Bitcoin digital asset exchanges that was just purchased by a SPAC. And so we're seeing a lot of institutional interest in the digital asset markets, which I think is something good and something more that we're going to see coming every day. I'll just share one personal anecdote, which I continue to chuckle about today. This only happened in the last week or two. I have two girls, 18 years old and 13 years old. And I don't know, we're going back a while again, probably about 7 years ago, after a talk from a gentleman who spearheads UN Women and their work in digital identity. I was talking to him about my two girls who were younger at the time and how I could get them interested in Bitcoin and fintech and digital asset. And he said, all right, well, just go buy them some Bitcoin, open up a Coinbase account and tell them that it's their Bitcoin and they can trade and exchange it and do whatever, and that'll get them interested. So I opened up a very modest Bitcoin account on Coinbase, tried to get my older daughter interested, to no luck and to no avail. 2 weeks ago, with all the press about Bitcoin hitting $40,000 a Bitcoin, she came to me and said, you know what, Mom, I really want that Coinbase account now. I said, no way, you missed the boat. So.
Well, to that end, I think, and as we get more into these topics, there is a lot of talk with the price movement. There's a lot of talk about digital assets, blockchain. And I think for a lot of people out there, these are still very much abstractions. So perhaps we can make them a little bit more concrete. Talk to us about how you work with work with these assets, but also, what is Bitcoin? What is the blockchain? How would you explain that to someone in layman's terms?
Yeah, well, I guess in layman's terms, so blockchain, digital currency is a form of currency that's only available in the digital form. And blockchain is based off of peer-to-peer topology, right? So it was meant for peer-to-peer cash sending of sorts, right? Meaning nobody's in the middle of this transaction. So, Ray, you mentioned, we're so used to, you send money with Venmo, or even like you can send money with bank. There's a middleman. There's a middle party there. And what's different is blockchain is essentially, they get rid of the middleman. And blockchain is a distributed ledger, meaning it's a public ledger that allows data to be stored globally on thousands of servers. So the middleman can't fudge with any type of transaction. It's there, it's public for everyone to see. So it makes it very difficult for one company or government to gain control. like Jennifer was talking about in the Congo, you know, like people live in a world where capital controls like even modern societies, right? Where like we're like when we interact with digital money today or the money today, we're very used to the idea that someone's in the middle of these transactions, right? When you send money on Apple Pay or PayPal, like PayPal's notorious for freezing accounts for whatever reason, right? Because they can. And so that's the whole idea behind blockchains, that, hey, as long as it is good at face value, then you can exchange it. Like, it doesn't matter who I am or who you are. The transaction is, it's almost like modern day gold, right? Like, here you go, here's gold. This is good. Check yes, great, perfect. We can complete this transaction without a middleman saying, I don't know, I'm not sure, I like whatever technology this person's in, or you name it. It basically gets rid of the bias behind it.
So then who is policing it? Who's deciding that, yes, this is good, or no, this is not good? Who gets to decide?
Well, that's all part written in the technology, right? You know, so just like we can figure out counterfeit dollars, right? You scan it, no, this $100 isn't real. You can decrypt counterfeit Bitcoin, right? And again, that's where it is. Now, once we get into holding wallets, now we are getting into third parties where all of a sudden, you know, even Bank and Coinbase and Binance, and now all of a sudden they get to be this middleman because they're holding on to your, you know, private and public keys, which goes into like convenience over, you know, security and privacy. And there's a fine line. So it's challenging, right? Where it's like, I own my own money, but still Coinbase actually decides a little bit. And so it's this fun kind of this weird nuance now where everyone's getting more into, and like Donna, your kids want to get into cryptocurrencies, and it's not as it's become more convenient for sure. Like, you don't have to remember, like, you're like, oh, I just wrote down 25 words, I think, and now I have no idea what I did with that. And that's it. Like, no one can help you. Because it's like, you're not going to call up the bank and be like, hey, I lost $20. I was somewhere on like Folsom and 8th. Can you help me? They're like, what? No, like, you lost $20. There's nothing we can do about that. For us, we're like, oh yeah, that's normal. But now we're so used to like calling up, you know, Wells Fargo or American Express, and you're like, hey, I think this was a fraudulent transaction. They're like, oh, don't worry, we'll help you out. You know, Bitcoin's a bit of a wild west like that, where you're really just holding on to your own cash. So there's power behind that, but then there's also, you know, some security risks, and you could lose your wallet.
So maybe I could jump in here, Ray, for a minute and just continue that commentary. And since there is a lot of duality in the sense that sort of DeFi and decentralization gives rise to a lot of opportunities, including with respect to the underbank, as Jennifer mentioned in her intro. And I think one of the challenges is actually going to be with digital assets is to do things differently, not to fall into the same capital market structures that we've had in the past, so that we're talking about, you know, slightly different technology, but all the same infrastructure. But balancing that is the fact that we have rules and regulations that, you know, deal with anti-money laundering, know your customer, fraud, to protect consumers and users of dollars, money, currency, Bitcoin, now digital assets. And they're there for good reason. So I do think that it's a difficult balancing act, because we certainly don't want Bitcoin to become a medium of human trafficking, right? Or the drug trade. On the other hand, as Melissa and Jennifer has alluded to, giving people the freedom in their financial lives is very powerful. So I think we're going to have to straddle this line between making sure that digital assets don't just become another asset class in the established capital market structure, but also protecting users, not only from, you know, perhaps their own scatterbrainness by losing their wallet and losing their Bitcoin, but making sure that the system is safe and sound and not used for illicit purposes.
I couldn't agree more, Donna. I think, you know, I think one of the threads of all of our conversations is the beauty behind while Bitcoin has massive promise, the beauty behind Bitcoin is the technology, right, which is blockchain. And the implications of that have, massive, addressable market opportunities. In general, I talk about kind of the features of the technology in 3 ways. One, which really is a transformational shift from the way that we look at the Internet 1.0 today, right? Or Internet 2.0 today. So the concept of it being distributed, right? I mean, all of us can relate to logging into our bank accounts at JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, Marcus, or Bank of America and saying, hey, if they say I have $100, that $100 is mine, right? The concept of a distributed database says that, is that really true? Like, if we had multiple financial institutions validating that balance, like if I'm sitting in the Congo and my balance says $1, will 12 other institutions validate that as well? The reality is today we rely on an API or an interface to tell us what that is, but it's not really truly distributed or accountable for. The second is the concept of immutability. And this is really powerful in distributed databases, and not to geek out into kind of what that looks like. But the idea of having, as a former recovering CPA and data scientist, like the ability to have an immutable database that allows you to see changes or edits that's completely accurate, real time, and fully transparent is revolutionary to the way the world works today. Melissa talked about this as it relates to kind of these third-party intermediaries that exist today. Hundreds of billions of dollars goes to these intermediaries to say party A and party B don't trust each other, so let's pay them to do that. The concept of the immutable ledger or transaction ledger around that allows us to interact with people all over the world and not have to pay any of these third-party intermediary costs. And then the third feature is this trustless nature, right? Today, we rely on these third parties to create trust in a system where code can do that. And so if you think about elements around smart contracts on the blockchain, if-then statements, right? If you do this, then this, the code, we replace trust with code. And so those are really kind of the exciting 3 features that I think are relevant as we talk about, the beauty behind Bitcoin and digital assets, which is the technology and what that technology can do across, a number of these sectors.
And I actually want to call out too, this is a women panel, something we might not think about or someone might not know, but banks could actually refuse credit cards to women until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974. Like 1974, people, like that was not that long ago, right? To where, if you look at throughout history, women's access to wealth has always been restricted. And when we think about blockchain technologies, though it's mainly male driven, it's so feminist. Like it is so beyond, like, it's just like built off of like the feminist backgrounds where like, I own my own body, I own my own wallet, I can do what I want. And it goes around globalization and just really elevating people to where you're like, hey, I don't need a third party that's going to judge me because I'm a woman. Like now my bank says I can't have a credit card. Like what? And this isn't, and this is still happening. Just, not in the US. We've become so used to it where it's like, oh, my balance is good, I trust my bank. Well, in a lot of countries you can't, right? Like in Congo, sure, it says I have $1 and that's only one bank. And then that one bank could be like, just kidding, you don't. And there's no one to say that you ever did.
So Melissa, I'm smiling, but like also like crying inside because I have stories of women that I've met with in Africa where in many tribal cultures, when a husband passes away of AIDS, which is really normal, the husband's brother is entitled to all of the property of the family. So the wife has absolutely no ability to access any of the family wealth that the husband or he or she has created. And so one of the early projects that we worked on was focused on identity, right? Because it was, women using fingerprints to be able to access bank accounts that were in their name. And so I remember attending a bridal shower where we had given kind of ATM cards with fingerprint technology to the women, which was powered by blockchain, where they were celebrating like, we're getting married, but these assets are my assets, not their assets. And it was just like this beautiful kind of crescendo of, pun intended, opportunity that existed for these women in a way that just really crystallized for me that like the unequal access to opportunity that exists and what the technology can really power.
That really is incredible. And I think, you know, we can take the opportunity now. We talk about the space and the way that it's a springboard to financial inclusion, and that includes for women. But also, you know, what about women within the space? Here we all are having this conversation. To me, blockchain is, you know, in digital assets, it's like this marriage of fintech and finance with this egalitarian spirit. And both those industries are traditionally male dominated. And yet here we are, paradoxically, this is a field where women are doing amazing things. What are your thoughts about that? Where do you see the opportunity for other women, and what advice would you give them to lead and to really get involved?
Let me just start with sort of a 30,000 foot comment, which is, I think women are so excited about digital assets and fintech because we have an innovative spirit, because the existing paradigm doesn't work for us, right? So we're willing to take risks. We have a natural intellectual curiosity because we want to say, how can we make this work for us? I'll leave the technology questions to Melissa and Jennifer.
Oh God. I mean, again, like, I think overarching in terms of like, how can women get more involved? I think it is still an obvious in terms of when I think about what I'm building out, what we'll continue to build out at Bank is how can we think first around, again, making the idea of blockchain continue to be a part of our DNA and continue to be a part of just this, you know, like you mentioned, this egalitarianism, this like women, like how are these assets ours? Like in the Congo, like, you know, you can't take that away from me. This is mine. And how do we make it easier for people to gain control of their finances? And that goes through not only just good UI, but also better choices. Like right now, banking sucks. And one thing like we ideally want to get to with Bank is like, banking doesn't have to suck, right? But then we realize, oh, for this, why do you have like a $250 limit? You're like, shit, because fraudulent charges suck. Like it hits, you know, like it sucks being like attacked by fraud, right? And it sucks, like so many different things make it really hard. But what we can do in terms of like women in fintech with the spirit, even if you're dealing with fiat currencies or digital assets, having just the idea of like, how can I make this more global? How can I make this more to where whomever owns these assets can really take ownership? And we're not, you know, like the moral arbiter of like the globe, right? Like if what you're doing is legal, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what you're doing. You know, PayPal, again, is notorious for being like, oh, well, I think you're an adult or whatever, and we're just going to block you. And especially women aren't able to be their own empires in certain industries. That is something I think it's very important that we focus on, and something that blockchain technologies can, because again, it's more of this face value, right? Like you, by taking the face out of what the currency is, you know, so you have these public ledgers and they're checking against each other, and the technology isn't there to say, oh, but she's a woman in the Congo, let's give that to her brother, or, you know, her husband's brother, right? It's just, that doesn't happen because it's just pure fact, zeros and ones, and there's no one to like, their biases can't go into it.
So I agree with a lot of what both Donna and Melissa have said. I think, you know, at my core, I believe that women are actually more suited to be entrepreneurs than our male counterparts across the globe. I think by nature, we are masterful multitaskers. I think we are problem solvers. And one of the beauties associated with kind of emerging or frontier technologies is that you need people who are coming to the table with a more innovative mindset. So thinking of not how things were done in the past, but how they could be done in the future, and optimizing for those efficiencies. And I think women are very well suited for that. You know, one of my favorite quotes is, I have no special talents, but I'm passionately curious. I think women are constant lifelong learners. And one of the beauties of getting engaged in an industry or a technology that's still so nascent is you don't have a pre-described path. So, for those of us who went to an Ivy League school, went into management consulting, got into investment banking, right? Like we all have very unique serendipitous paths that led us to the blockchain space. And there is no prescribed path, I think, for what the future of this industry is going to look like. And so whether you're in accounting or banking or consulting or something else, it doesn't preclude you from jumping in and getting involved now. And so that's really important, right? There isn't you need to have X, Y, and Z background in order to get into this space. I think it's you are excited about solving problems and yet leveraging technology to create impact. And you can lead from where you are at whatever stage or life cycle you are in your company or your industry or your career.
So I'm seeing a lot of questions pop up from the audience, and a lot of them, before we fully get into those, have kind of a regulatory type of tone to them. And so we're fortunate enough to have Donna here. 2020 was a big year on the regulatory front. And, I know, Donna, you've written an op-ed about, all these different regulatory authorities, the SEC, the OCC, the CFTC, the FDIC, all touching this space. And a lot of people have come out and said, well, it's just too much. It's segmented. It's this alphabet soup of regulation. And, I think soup's delicious, but apparently not everyone agrees with that. And so you came out actually and said, no, a monolith regulator in this space is not the answer. So do you want to talk to that a little bit, and just anything else you think is relevant that's coming up maybe in the regulatory front that we should be mindful of in 2021?
Sure, happy to. So yeah, this was an op-ed that was published in CoinDesk along with Sandra Rowe from the GBBC. And essentially the thesis is we acknowledge, very much that for startups and entrepreneurs, the US regulatory scheme can be daunting. There are a lot of regulators depending on what markets you're trying to access, what digital assets you're using, what your business case is. However, being practical, one is I don't think that we could have a monolithic regulator. That would take an act of Congress, and in this day and age, there's too many other priorities. So how can we work within the existing system? I think we call for better collaboration and communication between regulators, maybe something akin to the President's Working Group, where you have representatives from each of the relevant agencies, including, again, there's 50 states that also regulate this. So, once you even drop down from a federal level, but making it a priority, have collaboration and communication. And we also talk about, and we make the analogy, the decentralized, distributed nature of the current regulation does allow for incubation of different approaches. So we're more likely to land on and learn what the most effective and efficient approach is by looking to different regulators, how they're approaching regulation, seeing what works, what doesn't, what's successful, and what causes problems. So, we can look to a monolithic regulator more like the UK, but what happens if that regulator gets it wrong? What happens if that regulator is too slow moving? So I think that, let's live within what we have. It's been a very flexible system that's worked in the United States for hundreds of years. And we need to just stretch it. It's elastic. And we do need it to be stretched, right? We need a lot of conversations with regulators, explaining what the technology is, what it can do, how we can address potential problems and pitfalls. And we will need some regulatory action to stretch the boundaries of where we are now. And so I just encourage everybody, both the CFTC, the SEC, they all have these innovation hubs where they encourage people in the fintech and digital asset community to engage with them on what they see as issues, where they need regulatory guidance, and so on and so forth. In terms of what's happened recently on the regulatory front and what I see in 2021, a lot of it remains TBD. I don't have a good crystal ball, right? We had outgoing Treasury Secretary Mnuchin propose the travel wallet rule, the unhosted wallet rule, which basically said, you're going to have to treat unhosted wallets similar to how we treat cash transactions. And going back to my sort of opening comments, there's good reason to do that. You want to know who is transacting in large amounts of value and for what purpose. That's, I think, been put on hold with the incoming Biden administration. I know some in the digital asset space are touting that as a win. I think it remains to be seen as to how and if that will be implemented. In general, I don't see a wholesale shift. I think that regulators, again, are very intrigued by the technology. They don't want to be losers in the innovation race. So they are willing to be a little bit more flexible. But at the end of the day, depending on who they are, they have missions such as safety and soundness of the banking system, protection of consumer, and prohibiting fraud. And so they're going to have to keep to those mandates. So I think you'll see a slow evolution. Maybe to just end on one comment, and then I'd love to hear from the others as to how regulation affects their business and what they see, is that within the last 3 months, I've gotten so many calls on DeFi, right? Different startups and entrepreneurs with some sort of DeFi model where, you know, they're telling me that there really is no sponsor, right? I want to sell this token to fund my project or for use on my platform. And we're going to do it out of a foundation in Switzerland. And it really is decentralized. And, you know, don't worry. And, you know, I have to hold their hand gently, and it takes about 3 phone calls where I explain, that's great, but the SEC is not going to agree with your view, right? They're going to want to hold someone responsible for the operation of this system. And so, listen, we can talk about, you know, we can spend some time talking about whether or not we think you have a security. Chances are you do. And then we can talk about, well, how can you offer that security under existing US rules, and maybe go for some no action relief. And I think we saw that borne out in the Ripple action by the SEC. So I don't want to be a downer, but I don't see a significant shift away from that position in 2021.
Well, I mean, Donna, I mean, you bring up really phenomenal points. And I love, you know, how you mentioned, like, it's good for us to know the purpose, you know, but you also said, you know, who's making the transaction and the purpose. For me, I like to take more of the stance is that the purpose is the most important, right? As long as the purpose is revealed, like it's not for sex trafficking or for any criminal activity, definitely not for shrooms. I would never do that. You know, but like in 2019, you know, the criminal activity on Bitcoin was represented 2.1% of all cryptocurrency transactions. So that's roughly $21.4 billion worth of transfers. Interestingly enough, in 2020, the criminal share of all cryptocurrency activity fell to just 0.34%, which is still 10 billion in transaction volume. But, you know, by actually having some of these rules, it has definitely discouraged. And not only that, it's encouraged people to get on and adopt it as like a normal currency, as a part that we will be using and in order to buy our everyday products. But right now, with the problem with the middleman and the fact that they know who you are and the purpose, is it's really easy to snoop in on your transactions. Like, I mean, everyone somehow is still really amazed. They'll be like, oh my God, I was talking at my house about these spandex, and then all of a sudden Instagram like threw up this spandex ad, and I don't know where that came from. And you're like, wow, that's because like, I don't want to wear a metal helmet over my head, but it's like the world's listening, you know, like, yeah, your Amazon Alexa like picked up on that keyword, and like everyone knows the last purchase, like Melissa Lacey made on Instagram. She's a sucker for XYZ, right? What I love about blockchain, this is something that I would still want us to, what I would love for us to work in the direction of like kind of going into, we should know like at the foundation, maybe the institution needs to know their customer, right? At bank, like everyone needs a KYC. Like I need to know who you are, Donna, but whoever you transact with, look, if you don't want to be Donna, I am not going to share your name out to the world, because I think you get to do whatever you want to do, and you get to transact however you want to transact. If you don't want your name to be Donna, you can make it whatever you want. And it doesn't matter, right? Because as long as the transaction's good, as long as the purpose of the transaction is of legal standing, girl, do it. Turn on your privacy mode. How come it, why is it that every time I buy a cup of coffee, my full name's splattered everywhere? And even with Venmo, Cash App, if someone has my number, someone just looks up my name, it's, there you go. There's a full social history of everyone I've ever paid, what I'm doing. And that's something that the blockchain, it doesn't have. You know, again, you're protected by these numbers. Like no one's gonna type in Melissa Lacey and find all the random things I've bought with my Bitcoin. Again, and so that's where I think the government does need to take a stance in understanding purpose, but not fully publicly disclosing unless needed, unless that purpose is not of good standing, who's behind it, personally. Because that's when I think biases happen. And then we just go back to the same system we're in.
So I am told, sorry, go ahead.
You know, Melissa's raising this great point about data and data privacy, and that's one of the exciting use cases of the blockchain. So I'd be curious really to hear what Jennifer has to say about that.
I'll try to be short, but I have so many strong views on this, right? Like if we look at what's fundamentally wrong with the internet 1.0 and 2.0 version, it's that they're using our data to create market opportunities for other people. The beauty of the blockchain and the true like transformational element of it is that we control our own data, right? We own that data, whether it's our financial data, our health data, etc., and we can permission it as appropriate to whomever we want at any point in time, and not have to handle with all of these difficulties that you guys are talking about. And so when you dive into the underlying like transformational features associated with that technology, imagine a world where you and your family have access to all of your health data. You can permission that, turn that on or off to whatever doctor, whether you're in Rwanda or in New York or in London, on and off. You can fly through Tel Aviv and they can see that you've had your COVID vaccine, right? This idea of like a digital identity and everything about you from a data perspective lives with you is what I think is the beauty associated with the blockchain technology can do. And while governments are going to individually look at that from a regulatory standpoint, I think, again, KYC AML is critical, right? We talked about that. That's like the concept of knowing who your client is critical. And there's always going to be what I call kind of a permission-based system into applications into the blockchain that allow that. But once you have that, your passport or your identity can live with you and move wherever, and no one else controls that but you. And that's really like the underlying beauty associated with the technology. And no regulator is going to take that away from you once that goes viral.
So we're running out of time. I'm told we have time for one last question. So I'm going to choose one. What are the risks? What are the hurdles? What prevents Bitcoin and digital asset technology, the blockchain, from growing? And I can jump in here. I think from what we've seen, coming at it more from an investment angle is just education. And we all have various resources. We have resources, building blocks, and on our website. But that's kind of what I see in terms of people not getting involved, is that there's just so much noise out there, and it's hard to parse through it all. But I would love to hear what you guys see as what could prevent growth in the future.
What could prevent growth in the future?
Yeah. What are the hurdles to this technology continuing to grow and become more relevant and, do what we think it has the potential to do?
So I have oh, sorry, Donna, you might be on mute, but I think you have some thoughts.
Okay, I was just going to say, a continuation of things, I'll keep it really brief, but if we have some large scandal, right, some large hack, some large loss of a digital asset, then I think it's going to set back the whole industry.
Yeah, my views on hurdles. So I think to Ray's point, education is critical. I think part of why we're all here tonight is to help inspire people to learn more about what it means. Like, what does blockchain mean? What does Bitcoin mean? Like, what do all of these concepts really mean? And how does it tie to what you do day to day? And how could it change your job? The second is obviously regulatory. I think finding a way for both traditional incumbents and fintechs to work together with the regulators is going to be really critical, particularly as the United States positions itself as a continued kind of innovator in the financial services sector. And then just admittedly, technically, blockchains are slow. And so the concept of quantum computing and really technical aspects around how do we solve for scalability with data globally with hundreds of millions of transactions is not there yet. which is why this really is like a great call to action. Like people that are sitting in computer science roles, engineer roles, like you're solving problems every day. Like here's a problem that needs to be solved. And I don't think we've gotten to a place where we have a path forward there. The industry is still super nascent. So you have a chance to make a dent here in a unique way. And so those are kind of three, I think, really core areas of challenge that we all face in our day-to-day roles amongst the industry.
I have to say, Jen, that was just the perfect bow on the conversation. You're amazing. And I want to say that this has been such an interesting panel, so rich in conversation and informative. And it is because of all of you and how impressive you are and knowledgeable. And we can't thank you enough at NYC FinTech Women for dedicating the time and sharing the information. Ray, thank you for moderating. I think you were just the perfect pick. Sherman and Sterling, always there for us. So that's very, very exciting. I would just reiterate to everyone, we're here because, we love our members. If you're not a member, please join. We so appreciate every single one of you. Please check out our website. We've got a future event coming in February. And very exciting news, we have our first podcast dropping sometime in the near future. So look for us, Twitter and Instagram. And again, such an impressive panel, and we cannot thank you enough. So thanks again, and everyone have a terrific evening.